Hi everyone, welcome. We have to speak into the microphone because we've got lots of people online as well, but it feels like a very grand setup for a relatively cosy group of people. But it's absolutely great to be here, and it's great to be able to talk about this project to you today and get you engaged in it. So my name's Jenny Shaw. I'm Higher Education External Engagement Director for Unite Students. And Sam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Sam Kingsley, the Senior Belonging, Equity and Engagement Manager at Unite Students.
So first of all, just a little show of hands. Who in the room has seen and read at least some of the report? That's good. So we've got a mix of people who are familiar with it and those who aren't. So that will make for a good mix. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the research quite briefly, and we're going to go through some of the key findings, but we are also going to get you to engage with the recommendations of the report and come back with some thoughts and ideas in hopefully quite a useful way to move us on, because this research has been all about action and how we make a change. And I'm going to hand over to Sam now to get things going.
Thanks, Jenny. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of scene setting and kind of getting us all in the right mindset to talk about this kind of work. So sometimes we don't notice privileges because they're so ingrained in our culture. We're confronted on a daily basis with cultural and social norms that may be related to certain groups' privileges. We're also confronted with marginalised communities and perspectives that deserve to have a voice. So I'm going to do a little exercise with you, just to kind of frame the research and frame the kind of mindset that we've been working towards. We normally do this as a completely interactive stand-up type exercise, but I won't do that to you all today. So all I need is you to have both of your hands and your fingers up, and as I read, so I need you to have 8 fingers up to start off with, and as I read these statements out, I'm going to ask you to put a finger up or down. So, put a finger down if you're left-handed. Put a finger down if English is not your first language. Put a finger down if neither of your parents have a degree. Put a finger down if you can't find plasters at a mainstream shop designed to blend in with your skin tone. If you've regularly worked with people who you felt were like yourself, put a finger up. Put a finger down if you constantly feel unsafe walking alone at night. If you are able to move up through the world without fear of sexual assault, put a finger up. If you were ever made fun of or bullied for something you couldn't change or that was beyond your control, put a finger down. If you would never think twice about calling the police when trouble occurs, put a finger up. If you can't show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, put a finger down. If you have ever had to skip a meal or were hungry because there was not enough money to buy food, put a finger down. If you have a physically visible disability, put a finger down. If you have an invisible illness or disability, put a finger down. If you were ever discouraged from an activity because of race, class, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, put a finger down. If you ever tried to change your appearance, mannerisms, or behaviour to fit in more, put a finger down. If you feel good about how your identities are portrayed by the media, put a finger up. If you were ever accepted for something you applied to because of your association with a friend or family member, put a finger up. If someone has ever spoken for you when you did not want them to, put a finger down. If you come from a single parent household, put a finger down. If you were ever uncomfortable about a joke related to your race, religion, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, but felt unsafe to confront the situation, put a finger down. If you can make mistakes and not have people attribute your behaviour to flaws in your racial or gender group, put a finger up. If you went to university, put a finger up. If your parents told you that you can be anything you want to be, put a finger up. So normally, I'd do this in a room and everyone would be stood up and they'd be taking steps back and forward. And you'd be able to see that we have lots of similarities and there are lots of differences. But what's really important is understanding that not everyone starts the race at the same place, even though it's worth running for everyone. And if you're not thinking about the people who are further back, who don't have any fingers left up, then we're not doing our jobs to create an inclusive environment. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny to talk a little bit more about why we did the research.
So Professor Edward Peck did quite a lot of the work for us on this morning by saying just how important belonging is in accommodation for students and how that contributes to their mental health. So hold that thought because we'll be coming back to that. But for me, it came from two things. One, I've been in the accommodation sector now nearly 11 years. I know just how important, as you all do, where you live is on the student experience and how it contributes to success. But I also knew we knew very little, if anything, on a systematic basis about the experience of black students, and yet from my conversations with students, and black students in particular, I suspected there were some things that were not being brought to light that we needed to understand and look at. So for me, that was a real prompt to commission this research. There's also the knowledge of the black attainment gap in the higher education sector, so the difference between white students and black students being awarded a first-class degree is honestly an embarrassment to the sector, and I think everyone in the sector would acknowledge that. And something that has been very difficult to get a handle on. And we were sure that accommodation might hold some of the keys to being able to continue to tackle that and create that equality of outcome. But I'm going to hand over to Sam as well, because you've got some thoughts on why we did this research.
So I think I was really proud to join a business that was doing this research, and it had been commissioned just before I joined. What I thought was really important is the listening in. So in trying to create equitable environments, we need to listen to the students, that they really hold the key to being able to solve the issues that currently exist. And my role at Unite is really about creating equity for everyone, both internally and for our students. And I think what was really key is that we knew what was going on. No one's really surprised by the outcomes and the findings from the research. But there's something really important about not just continuing to research, and actually creating actionable change. And that's what has been a huge part of listening to the students, is actually building trust with them by acting on the outcomes of what they've said. So. So one of the biggest things we've done in response is to create the Unite Students Commission on Living Black at University. So this is a national group, and we have representatives from various groups, including the Codes. It's chaired by Professor Iola Solanke from Oxford University, and we are doing what we can at a national level to really improve the accommodation student experience for black students in PBSA in the UK, but we also hope that goes out to other types of accommodation as well. And currently we are working on a range of toolkits, sector-wide training and standards to improve the student experience and to get more consistent data for something that hasn't really been researched before.
Thanks, Sam. And from the Unipol side of things, Victoria Tommy Loverseed is representing Unipol on that commission. So we're going to whiz quite quickly through some of the key findings because it is a report that's been out for a little while. Some of you have read it. So just going to pick out on a few key things, but going back to that sense of belonging, so important, and just look at that difference in sense of belonging between black students and white students in the research, quite shocking. And I think probably all the rest of the slides will sort of underline this as well and why. So lots of little things. It was being othered, being slighted, being profiled, lots and lots of microaggressions throughout the experience from staff and from other students. It was also about the environment, culturally relevant services. About a quarter of black students in the survey couldn't access culturally relevant services close to where they live. I mean, this is huge. So if you can't get your hair done, if you can't find the foods that you like to eat, if you can't just have that feeling of being at home when you first go away from home, that's going to have a massive impact. There are also some issues there with how students were allocated. In some ways it felt like segregation to them. And the real issue of not having staff that look like them in their accommodation. I was just saying to Sam when we came in, this is probably the most diverse room of accommodation professionals that I've ever been in, and it's fantastic to see. But we don't see that across the country necessarily, particularly in cities that are not very diverse. That is problematic for students. Policies and procedures. Students, I'm not going to say students didn't know about policy and procedures. What I'm going to say is that black students hadn't been told about policies and procedures that they could draw on to report racism, exclusions, microaggressions, those things that were affecting their experience. When they did know that there was something, there were low levels of trust in the process. And again, that was sometimes linked to the profile of the staff that were available to them. Would they understand? Would they be able to relate to or understand the severity of the things that they were reporting, or would they be kind of minimised and dismissed? I think, Sam, you're going to do the next two, aren't you?
Great. So anyone who is of lived experience of being racially minoritised in a white majority space will know that anywhere you go, you do experience racism. So the findings here weren't surprising, but disappointing that after all the education that has been going on socio-politically, it still exists. Touching of the hair, using inappropriate language, and a real sense that not just employees but also students need to be educated when moving into spaces, especially students who are not minoritised. There was also mention of staff, again, just racially profiling people. Nobody wants to live in a space where they feel like a bouncer is at the front door. I definitely don't, but especially not one who is going to discriminate against them because of their race. Again, just making it more difficult to report instances. And then perhaps one of the most important findings to me, alongside being disappointing, is that 75% of students said that their mental health was affected by racism whilst in accommodation. And of course, as we know, there are not many therapists with lived experience, and therefore it made it difficult to find somebody who could help. And it's really made us think about the services that we provide, not just for mental health, but across the spectrum. Have they been designed with inclusivity in mind, or have they been designed for one group? Which takes us on to the 10 recommendations from the research. So for me, the most important and the one that we're really working towards is recommendation 10, which is about building trust with black students. And really the first 9 recommendations are the journey that gets us there. Do you want to take over?
Sorry, I was just in a bit of a reverie then, thinking about some of the feedback that we've had. So that whole issue about building trust, it's amazing how many stories we've heard from parents, actually. So some of the people that we've been working with through the commission to say, well, actually, my child doesn't want to move away to go to university because of some of these things. So there is something there about building trust for students who come to accommodation, but also building trust for those who might otherwise limit their choices and absent themselves from that experience. Approving acclimatisation. So this was an interesting one, and there's quite a good write-up of what this means within the report, but there's something about inducting all students to become part of a community that does have people in it different from themselves, and you know, what does that mean? What types of behaviour are appropriate? Because 18-year-olds don't always know, particularly if they come from a background where they've only ever seen people who are similar to themselves. It's also something that's helpful for international students coming to the UK for the first time, many of whom are from different ethnic backgrounds and may just take a while to struggle with that culture shock as well. So that's something that can help. Meaningful race training. I feel like, I know it's a bit of tag team, I feel like you need to talk about the race training, Sam, on this one.
So we're doing a lot of work at the moment and actually working with Victoria on what meaningful means for race training. I think most organisations have some sort of EDI training. In most organisations it's not very good, it's a bit tick boxy, and that doesn't really work if you're trying to build a culture of belonging. So one of the things that we're working on internally and hope to be sharing with the Commission, we've recently launched some new EDI training as a real foundation for then going on to talk about anti-racism. We need to give people the language and we need to build a consistent conversation. A one-off piece of e-learning is not going to build the environment that we want to build. Another piece that is really important to this is the idea of unconscious bias. And whilst it's been trained for a long time, what it did was just tell us that we have biases. I'm sure all of you have been on some sort of training course. What's really important is how we mitigate those biases. So I think we're all clear on what we know about unconscious bias now. It's now time to actively put together the skills of conscious inclusion, and in the hope that eventually practice makes perfect and it becomes instinctive to us all.
I'll rattle through as many of these as I can. So there's something there about a visible commitment to tackling racism, and that might mean making very clear what the policies are for reporting racism, but also making clear those expectations of behaviour and just really over-communicating that, if anything, because that does set the tone and the standard. And there's some work that's bubbling up at the moment in the Commission about how that can work through student behavioural agreements or charters or conduct codes and so on. Number 5 is improving the representation of black people as employees. And again, this is something that came up so much in the research and from the students, particularly in the focus groups. Number 6 is about working together. This is something that I suppose we are doing through the Commission, but I think it's also a call for universities and private providers to work together on a local level, in a city, in a region, and particularly for universities to use the leverage of their purchasing power over nominations beds to help drive some of these changes as well. Clear and accessible policies and procedures I have mentioned. We are having, I think it's in January, isn't it? We're having a Commission meeting specifically on that. Universities UK are very keen to be involved. Obviously it will involve Unipol as well, and we've got the Office of the Independent Adjudicator who are, between them, going to take the lead on this, just to look at what a good reporting policy and procedure would be. Data is a big one. We are just in the late stages of putting together an EDI data maturity model, which one of the helping partners has helped us to put together. It's a bit of a big beast, I'll be honest, but we're trying to make it relevant to accommodation teams as well as an institution as a whole. And that should help, because one of the things that, as in conversation with universities that we've come across, is it's often quite difficult for university accommodation teams to get diversity data on the students that they are accommodating, even though that data does exist somewhere in the university, but there are lots of barriers to getting good quality data. And then finally, going back to the beginning, I suppose, which is building that relationship of trust with Black students. So they're the recommendations, and as I say, there are, within the report itself, there are a lot more sort of details behind that. But for those of you in the room in particular, we're going to get you to do a bit of work now. So what I'm going to recommend to people who are joining online is do just Google Unite Students Living Black at University and have a look at the report, have a look at the recommendations, and as I give a bit of instruction about what the exercise is, think about this for yourselves and do, post on the chat, which we may or may not be able to see. We'll do our best, but post your thoughts on that as well with maybe a cup of coffee in hand. So what I'm going to suggest is not the best room for doing discussion groups, but I'm sure we can manage because we're all pretty creative. So I'm going to give out a big copy of the recommendations. They've slightly suffered from being in my laptop bag for 4 days, so apologies, but I think they're still legible. And I'm going to suggest you get yourselves in groups of maybe 3 or 4 people, just people you're sitting near. Feel free to move the chairs around. We can always move them back afterwards. And want you to use, what we've been talking about and the recommendations that I'm going to give out to think about standards. So we are in the Joint Codes Conference. There isn't, I think, unfortunately at the moment, a clear pathway to getting some of this in the codes. I think that's going to be some way in the future because these things take time. However, I do want you to think about standards. So what standards would be useful in the future to help drive some of this change? What would that look like? What kind of standards do we want to hold university accommodation teams and private providers to in order to make this change happen? Because this change does need to happen. So I'm going to come around and give those. If you want to start shuffling yourselves into discussion groups, and we'll give you some time to do that, and then we'll have the feedback as well. It's like my alarm in the morning. I think I switched it off and it goes off
If I
again.
don't turn it off properly, it just restarts the timer.
Okay, we've got, hi everyone. We've got about 10 minutes left in the session, and it would be good to get some feedback from the group. So there's some great conversations going on, and I'm sure they'll continue over lunch. But we're also saying we're not sure how far everyone's got in terms of thinking about standards. It's probably quite a big ask in such a short time, but it would be good to get thoughts and reflections from around the room. Does anyone want to kick us off on that? I mean, oh great, I don't need to pick on people then, go ahead. That's okay. Oh, apologies. So we've got a roving mic, I've just been told. So we're learning about hybrid events. This is good.
Like it's on. Oh yeah, it's on.
There
Oh
we go.
God, it is on. Oh God, I feel important now. So we discussed kind of having culturally relevant information displayed. So rather than just kind of generic, if you've got mental health issues or you need support, you can go here. Really kind of exploring the community and seeing what's available to everyone and having it up on display and kind of promoting it to the students. We talked about a lot of it was kind of reflecting what you were talking about already, but being kind of conscious of recruitment and making sure that you have a diverse team so that students feel, you're not just kind of greeted by the same faces. You've got like quite a diverse group of people that you can approach if you need support and kind of identify with. We talked about training, the importance of kind of standardized training across the sector, which you've kind of touched on earlier. And also kind of creating a safe environment with, more so within the team, just so that they feel comfortable talking about issues such as racism, because people tend to kind of clam up as soon as something like that kind of issue comes up. People are scared, they're worried about making mistakes in the language that they use. So it's about creating that safe environment where you can make mistakes, but we kind of talk through it and that kind of thing. Was that the main kind of thing we talked about? Leadership and culture, do you want to?
We've talked about the messages coming from the leadership of the organisation and the culture you're creating, and those messages have to come out from the top in various ways, so that people feel that they're in an environment that they can speak up and say what they want. But that leadership is so important from the top. You've got to create that environment for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. So a question back to you as a group, and anyone in the group can take this. Which of those things did you feel you could just crack on with and do, and which did you feel that would benefit from either a standard or some kind of support, or something from beyond your own walls?
Well, I'm fortunate. I've just started in the sector. I'm brand new to it, so I feel like I can just crack on with it. But
excellent.
Also, it would be good, I think, because we talked about the importance of having like standardized training, so that everyone, there's a minimum standard across all of the sector. So I think it would be useful to get that kind of external kind of training that isn't just like tick boxy or e-learning, which people just kind of groan at. So that's my thoughts anyway. Any disagreements? No.
That's great. Thank you. And that's really helpful to bring that back into the work of the Commission, because we have been talking, and particularly with Unipol, but with other people on the Commission, about that standardised training and how to make sure there's a good register maybe of trainers that are really competent in this area and able to contribute. Can we go to Ed's group, Ed and everyone's group? So I'm just picking on people who I know here.
We discussed a lot of things, not really consolidated it into a standard as such, but I think some of the themes that were important for us was about encouraging inclusivity of the students and the support that they get from not just the staff, but from students that we hire in-house as well. So you might call them senior residents, residence assistants or some other name, but having that team be as diverse as possible and be able to connect with Black students was something that was raised as being important. And while the other group was kind of just talking, just something came into my head is that actually I'm from the private sector, and our team will probably only see students 1 hour in the morning, 8 to 9, and probably the 5 to 6 shift, but actually the security teams and other external third parties that are not necessarily part of the brand will have more interaction with them. It's because we have outsourced security, for example. Other providers might have their own internal night team. So just engaging with those third parties is really important, just to make sure that they are consciously aware of the brand's efforts to address this issue.
And that's a really important one. Again, that came up quite a lot in the research, that sometimes there are third-party security or contracted-in people, and some of them may come from an organisational background that does have a history of institutional racism itself, and that can cause all kinds of issues. So something about sort of controlling quality, I suppose. Any further thoughts from that group in terms of things that it would be good to do more broadly in the sector, and things that you can just go and do?
I think a lot of the points were covered by sort of the first group, but for me, and I think a couple of other members here, how we engage with these universities is still a bit of a concern, and the data aspects as well is still of a concern, because in the application processes kind of sampled within our group, we don't actually collect race data. We might collect address, which might give us a country, we might collect nationality, but we don't necessarily collect race data at all.
That's a real biggie, and I think that's quite common in the private sector, and it's also, we're finding, quite difficult for accommodation teams in universities always to get that data in a very clear way, and yet that's something that you can use really to make a big transformation. You can see where the issues are, you can sort of identify places for change. So I think we're all going to have to go on a bit of a journey with that. Thank you. Can you pass through to the team at the back?
I think most of the points have been raised. The same thing about having staff that just reflect what our students look like as well. One thing we touched upon was maybe about report and support. Basically, I was a student like 7 years ago, and one point that I raised was that sometimes Black students don't want to raise the racism that's happened. So maybe having an anonymous system, or where they can report things online, where they can have a choice of where they want to put their name or not. Whether they can report at any time at 2 a.m. if they're thinking about it, and then they can continue to report. So if later on, down the line, they're actually like, I want to come forward, you have all that trail and all that evidence right there. And if it's on the online system as well, you can see what's going on in your flats. If they put where they are living, you might be aware of some issues there. You can even pop in, see what's happening. So that's one thing we talked about. One thing that came to the top of my mind to improve the experience of Black students is every month at universities we'll always have some sort of month where we're being aware of something, mental health month or Black History Month and stuff. And I think tokenism is a key thing that I would think here. Putting up Martin Luther King serving rice and chicken in the canteen is not something that would make Black students feel included. I think it's actually putting the worth, getting the people that are there, maybe getting Black employees involved and actually thinking outside of the box. Because if you do that in accommodation, it will make them seem a little bit more seen, if we're not just doing with the basic, this is Martin Luther King kind of thing, actually inquiring and looking into things. I'm thinking, what else did we talk about? Staffing. I think staffing is key, especially like what you said with external providers. We're very lucky because we work at the University of Hertfordshire. We have resident assistants, and I believe 90% are black students. So we've been very lucky with that aspect. Security as well is quite diverse, so I feel that that's been quite helpful actually when they've been dealing with situations, just having that understanding. One area where we could do better is probably in mental health, especially because within black students and black communities, mental health is such a big thing, but there's a big stigma. I don't believe we have any counsellors that are black, and talking to some black students that have supported, the problem is they have this fear that sometimes the counsellors may not get the cultural issues that they have. So they're more likely not to go to them without thinking that they're going to be told they sound a bit mad, or they're just apprehensive. So maybe cultural training, and maybe on training on mental health and religion and stuff as well, because we have a lot of black students who are quite religious. So some things you may hear from a white student might give you red flags, but it may not be the same aspect with certain black students because it may be religion and culture, but that's very difficult to ascertain, and I even struggle with that myself, so training and stuff like that. Amanda, anything? Yeah, it was a mix. So we were talking about the term BAME, which is interesting because I can't speak for everybody, and I can't speak for all black people, but some people believe in the word BAME and some people don't. I don't agree with the word BAME, but you don't, So that's a discussion maybe to be having within universities and seeing what your student population think about it, because I'm not for the word BAME. It's been great getting that research and it's done what it's done, but I don't think it helps certain issues because each group has their own certain issues within themselves. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much in that. That's really helpful. Thank you. Particularly like the idea of much more meaningful engagement rather than tokenism, and putting that work in. That's really helpful. Thank you. And then finally, group at the back, and then we can have lunch.
We each had a lot to contribute, so I'll pass the mic on if that's okay. we did. My initial thoughts were about dealing with it on different levels. So as far as your code's concerned, that was more about setting KPI, SLA. KPI and SLA to do with employment numbers, systems being able to have contact drivers for from race or for complaints to do with discrimination and so on. On the operational, that would translate as, say, your e-induction being modified to include a question about diversity, so that every single student that you're inducting, every single student in accommodation sees a video about diversity, which might include ways to raise complaints, your complaints processes, your complaints policies, etc. And then somebody else had a really good idea because they're actually doing it, so I'll pass the mic on if that's okay.
Yeah.
You have to speak.
Hi, I was actually on the initial call when you guys launched the report, so that was really fortunate. I was able to implement changes that were within my remit, my small world that I hold. So as part of the last booking cycle, the 2022, September 22 cycle, we were able to introduce a student charter.
Fantastic.
On the student journey. So we looked at the different touch points from our students. So post A-level results here, we all know what happens. We ask our students to complete a health and safety induction, blah, blah, prepare their arrival. And part of that process, we're able to actually write a charter and get them to read the charter and agree to the charter. And then on arrival weekend, again, making sure that our CF or RS were there to make sure that the message was still there. So, and now we are looking at the rest of the academic year and what are the different touch points where we can reinforce the message. So in our case, it was a question of, yes, we have the disciplinary policy. We know how to deal with microaggressions, with reports of racism, but we're not actually telling them what our expectations of them are.
Yeah.
So we can't, as a parent, you can't punish your child if you didn't tell them what you were expecting from them. So it's important for us to reiterate that message at every single opportunity. And then if they don't listen, then we can apply the policy. But moving forward, we want to do more. A charter is not enough. We want to do more. But it's finding the channels that are within our remit, because if we go up, then we'll be into processes for years. So it's what we can apply within our own remit.
So I've got to say something now.
Yeah.
You've said it all. I think some of the things that we were discussing as well is actually, are we having those open and honest, transparent conversations with our students? And I think sometimes, and we were talking to Sam, that even with our allocations policies, just by default and how we allocate, we may be segregating students. Now, there is a reason for that, but I think sometimes do we actually explain that reason so it's understood? There's an element of looking at it and why we do it, but if there is a rationale, I think it's about how we explain that to our students and how we get that message across that, this is why, all our rugby students are in a block, because they're all rugby students. And it's just explaining that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And would you be happy to share some of that work you've done on the charter? Yeah.
Sure.
I'll talk to you separately. So I think we're coming up to time, aren't we, for lunch? And I do not want to keep people from food. I never want to do that. But thank you so much for participating in this. And I'm going to challenge everyone to either do something or start something on the back of today that will make a difference to black students, because we've just got to keep this going. So thank you. Do you want to?
Also, last note, please do reach out to us if you've got any thoughts or ideas, or if you've got anything that you can share with us. We really want to share knowledge across the sector. We can't do it alone, and it's going to take all of us. So our email address is on screen, and please find us. Thank you.